evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's debate. My name is Flynn Hutchinson, and I am the chairman. And Tanya Sureshkumar is the timekeeper. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators who are Ms. Jihan, Ms. France, and Mr. Ivanov. The topic of this debate is that the university HECS debt should be abolished. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Endeavour College. The negative team seated to my left is Pembroke School. The speaking time for this debate is 6 minutes, with a double bell at the end of your speaking time. A warning bell will ring once at 5 minutes. A continuous bell will ring 30 seconds after the final bell. Please switch off your mobile phones and other electronic devices. I declare this debate open. I call upon the first affirmative speaker, Hayley Chang.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and Mr. Chairperson. The topic of tonight's debate is that the university HECS debt should be abolished. We, the affirmative team, strongly believe this statement to be true. We define HECS, or Higher Educational Contribution Scheme, as a scheme of 2 components, both a loan and a student discount. Under the scheme, the government pays a student's course fees directly to the educational institute on a loan basis, according to H&R Block. The student then pays back the amount via the tax system once the income reaches a certain threshold. In addition, indexation is added to this loan each year, meaning that the amount paid in total will be higher than the original, according to the Australian government. When referring to HECS, we regard it as HECS Help due to the 2 programs being merged in 2005, according to the Parliament of Australia. We define abolished as to formally put an end to something, as cited by the Oxford Dictionary. This would mean that the HECS debt would be terminated. Tonight, as your first affirmative speaker, I'll be talking about how HECS debt is a huge financial burden on graduates and the discrimination that it brings. Our second speaker, Samantha, will be talking about how HECS debt negatively affects getting home loans and how it deters people from pursuing further education. And our third speaker, Monique, will rebut the opposition and then summarise our case. My first point is how HECS debts are a huge financial burden on graduates. Money has always been a central part of the world, and I'm sure that none of us are strangers to financial issues. But imagine having an ever-increasing debt in your tail for about 10 years, according to the ABC News. Graduates don't exactly have it easy. According to the LSG, HECS Help debts do not accrue interest. They are adjusted annually through a process called indexation. The value of the debt keeps pace with inflation. But don't be fooled by the lack of interest. As we've all seen, inflation has left its mark on economics. I think you can see how this can be problematic. Let's put this into perspective. According to the Department of Education, the 2024 indexation was applied at a rate of 4.7%. The average amount of HECS debt is $24,000, and index that debt is elevated to about $25,000. This may not seem like much, but keep in mind that there's only 2 years' worth of debt. Even when considering the legislation passed, meaning that indexation tops at 4%, I'd like to reiterate that HECS debt takes an average of 10 years to pay off. End of those 10 years, and that person will be sitting on about $34,385, 37% increase. It's ridiculous. But we're just talking about averages. According to the University of Adelaide, this HECS debt can reach up to $122,000. Add on the years of indexation, and you've got yourself something never going to pay off. And don't think that having a high HECS debt is rare either. 55,000 Australians have at least $70,000 of debt, according to ABC News. In 2023, the total outstanding debt owed was over $78 billion. However, indexation has kept adding upon this number. News.com states that Caitlin Cassidy, a journalist, said, "I paid back $3,000, so my debt is now $106,000. But if indexation is 4% this year, it'll go back up again by $4,000 to $110,000, even higher than last year." This is what we mean by debt spiral. In fact, according to Change.org, Dr. Ryan stated that over 1 million Australians saw their HECS debt grow faster than it was being repaid because of an unfair indexation system. Do we really want a loop of paying off your debt only for the next year to erase all that process? Indexation and HECS goes hand in hand. Abolishing this HECS system will relieve the financial stress upon graduates, advocating for a healthier, fairer society. My second point is on how HECS debt disadvantage certain groups of people and how that displays government hypocrisy. Whether or not you believe in equality or equity, governments have placed their efforts into levelling the playing field with talks of strategies to achieve gender equality or encouraging birth rates. But what if I told you that HECS debt makes these endeavours hypocritical? HECS debts disadvantage less profitable, more noble jobs. The average salary of a teacher, for example, according to Indeed, is $91,000 per year. This corresponds to a payment rate of 5%, and according to the Department of Education, teachers typically end up with about $40,000 worth of HECS debt. With these numbers, we can then see that a teacher of HECS debt would have a salary of about $89,000. Well, that's only the first year. If we consider the indexation and the fact that paying back 5% of your HECS debt every year would mean that it will take 20 years to pay it off entirely, it sounds a whole lot worse. And teachers aren't the only ones affected. Policemen, childcare workers, firefighters, all those for the good of other people jobs are encouraged by the government no less to be taken as careers, despite the disadvantages. HECS debts also disadvantage those wanting to start families. On average, women have children at 25 to 35 years of age, according to the Institute of Health and Welfare. The knowledge that students graduate at about 21 to 24, and with HECS debt taking an average of 10 years to pay off, you can see there's discrepancies within the numbers. This debt is repaid through the tax system, meaning that if someone were jobless, their debt would continue to accumulate throughout the years due to indexation. Parents quitting jobs to take care of children would end up costing more than it needs to, with the possibility of thousands of dollars accelerating upon their already increasing debt. As a society, we've been striving for equality. HECS debts go against everything we've been working for. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairperson, as you can clearly see, the university HECS debt should be abolished because it's a huge financial burden on graduates and because it discriminates against certain groups of people. Thank you.
I now call upon the first negative speaker, Ashni Weerasongya.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, ladies, gentlemen, and of course the opposition. As the Affirmative team has already stated, the notion for this debate is that the university HECS debt should be abolished. As the negative side of this case, we firmly disagree with this statement. We agree with the Affirmative team's definition, but reaffirm, so we have clarity tonight, the university HECS debt refers to all existing HECS debts in Australia. However, we the negative team believe this is false. As the first speaker, I will address how abolishing HECS debts will deeply worsen income and racial inequality rather than support individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. I will also highlight the unfairness of eliminating HECS debts and the negative impact this would have on past and future students and those who have already made voluntary repayments. Our first speaker will discuss the inflationary pressures and the expectation of financial relief that university graduates would have if HECS debts were abolished. Our final speaker will rebut the opposition and summarise our team case. Before I begin my speech, I would like to point out some obvious flaws of the Affirmative team. The first Affirmative speaker has said that even just CPI indexation, inflation, can drown students in debt. Let's assume the rate at which the CPI increased, Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, exceeds the rate at which salaries grow. Yeah, that would make the loan harder to repay as time goes on. But this ties to the point I will raise, which is that if you think a loan index to inflation is bad, which about people working minimum who have bank loans, which always have an interest much higher than inflation, and where payment isn't contingent on income, they should be helped first. As of 2023, HECS loans are applied to either the CPI or WPI, Wage Price Index, whichever is lower. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition's points neglect to highlight key ideas that are imperative when considering that the university HECS debt should be abolished. Now to my first point. Let's begin by framing the issue. Abolishing HECS debts is essentially like giving a large sum of money directly to university graduates, a group already statistically better off than the average Australian. Open University Australia states people with a bachelor's degree currently earn a median wage of $1,500, while people without a qualification earn a median wage of $934 a week. This goes up over time, with graduates seeing an 88% increase in their salary in the decade after they finish uni. This action would reinforce existing income inequalities, benefiting those already in a better financial position. While it can be argued that abolishing HECS would provide immediate financial relief to graduates, it's essential to consider the long-term implications and the potential for exacerbating income inequality. This leads to a deeper issue: racial inequality. An article from the Australian Bureau of Statistics stated that currently only 6% of Indigenous Australians aged 20 to 24 attend university, compared to 24% of non-Indigenous Australians in the same age group. Since HECS loans are only available to those who attend university, abolishing HECS debts would disproportionately benefit non-Indigenous Australians, widening the gap rather than closing it. This is not just an issue of income inequality, but of racial inequality as well. Furthermore, in a world of limited resources, financial relief should be targeted at those who need it most, those who are structurally disadvantaged, living near or below the poverty line, and dealing with debts far less favourable than HECS loans. For instance, an article from ABC News stated that nearly 2/3 of university students in Australia live below the poverty line, with many facing significant financial stress. Indigenous students and those from low socioeconomic backgrounds are particularly vulnerable, highlighting the need for targeted relief that addresses these disparities. Providing relief to university graduates who are already better off is unfair and counterproductive to reducing overall economic inequality. To create a fairer society, we should focus on helping those in genuine financial distress, not those already in a position of relative advantage. This leads me to my next point. Abolishing HECS debts would be deeply unfair to those who have already paid off their debts or made significant voluntary repayments. This creates a moral hazard, penalising those who acted responsibly and sacrificed to repay their debts while rewarding those who did not. The sense of injustice is profound when considering two students with $100,000 in HECS debt in 2020. If student 1 worked part-time and voluntarily repaid $60,000 by 2024, while student 2 did not repay, abolishing HECS debts in 2024 would nullify student 1's efforts. This is not just a hypothetical scenario, but a genuine concern about fairness and equity that we cannot ignore. So, Mr. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, we, the negative team, firmly disagree with the notion of tonight's debate that the university HECS debt should be abolished. Not only does it worsen income and racial inequality, but it's also deeply unfair to past and future students. To achieve equity and fairness, we must seek solutions that target financial relief to those who need it most, rather than offering blanket benefits that exacerbate existing disparities. Thank you.
Call upon the second affirmative speaker, Samantha Perrin.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and Mr. Chairperson. The topic for this evening's debate is that universities' HECS debt should be abolished. As the affirmative team, we strongly agree with this statement. Our first speaker, Hayley, talked about the discrimination that HECS debt brings and how it's a huge financial burden on graduates. As your second speaker, I'll be introducing how it deters further study and how HECS debt reduces the borrowing power of graduates, But first, I share about the negative team's points. The negative team has tried to tell you that by abolishing HECS debt, it will basically giving money to graduates, except it's funding their education. They don't get that money in their pockets. They get to earn it instead of having it taken away from them. My first point is that HECS debt deters further study. One major loan to pay back is a lot of pressure, and many students don't want the burden of adding to it. After finishing a degree, many students get jobs to try and pay off their HECS debt. So if they do more study, the study-life balance will be extremely skewed with the addition of study, life and work. This also has a knock-on effect to courses that take longer to complete, preventing time they would have to pay it off, or important careers that require many degrees or further study. Let's take a look at a real-life example. What if a student wants to be a doctor? Arguably one of the most important jobs in our world requires a degree, many years of med school and an internship. When you think about the time it takes and the costs in all of those things, it does seem incredibly daunting or even unreachable. Dr. Ryan Grayson, an assistant professor of medicine at the University of California, says that because of all the debt, people stop thinking of medicine as an incredible opportunity to do good. For others, such large debts mean foregoing a medical career altogether. Business graduate and first homebuyer Tyler Thurston wrote to ABC News, highlighting the impact of growing debt on his ability to complete further study. I feel like my student debts, which are considered regular factors of life, are sending me further and further backwards, he said. My ability to upskill and further undertake education is limited by the fact that I do not wish to add to this debt. Many students don't understand the magnitude of HECS debt until it's upon them, and it's at that time when they consider whether or not they're going to continue studying. Tyler states that I'm concerned that young people, and in fact all students, will be reconsidering their desire to seek further education due to the increasing costs of maintaining a student loan. Of course, it's not only that students don't want to add to existing debt, some students are genuinely worried about repaying their debt at all. According to a recent Finder survey that included more than 1,000 people, more than 3 in 5 respondents are extremely worried about their ability to repay their HECS debt. The study even found that 12% don't believe they'll ever be able to repay their loan at all. If we abolish HECS debt, more students would feel able to complete lengthier courses or multiple degrees and not have the mental strain that affects so many parts of their lives. While HECS debt is designed to be manageable and flexible, the psychological and financial implications of existing debt can deter students from pursuing further education. This is why HECS debt should be abolished. My second point is that having a HECS debt reduces the borrowing power of graduates. Once you finish university, you get a job to help save up for those milestone purchases, a house or a car. But studying, which helps you to get a job, costs lots of money, which is why so many students choose HECS to pay off their debt. Approximately 2.95 million Australians have a HECS debt, according to the Australian Taxation Office. Everyone wants to have their own house eventually, right? But given the current housing crisis, almost no one has the money to buy one outright, and if they do, they wouldn't have to use the HECS system to begin with. So majority of people turn to home loans to help them get there. However, how much you can borrow is affected by your debts and your risk factor, and student debt like HECS is considered on the same level as credit card debts. Because HECS debt already takes a portion of your income when earning a certain amount, it reduces the amount you can pay back on home loans, so lower loans are given out by lenders. Finspo, a mortgage broker, says that as a rough rule of thumb, you could expect your maximum borrowing power to reduce by around 10 times the value of your annual HECS repayments. That is a huge amount. So when students are trying to plan their lives and make decisions, what they can actually do is restricted by their HECS debt. Having a lower borrowing capacity due to HECS means that certain types of properties and living areas will be unreachable for many graduates until they pay off their debt. And as Haley's mentioned, that takes like a decade. Meet Ben Haber, a regular Melbourne man. The 28-year-old studied for 6 years to become a lawyer, but was left with $140,000 of HECS debt. He admits that I didn't look at my HECS debt at all until I applied for a home loan and needed to supply those numbers for the bank. He said it'd been difficult shopping around for a mortgage after being denied a home loan by 3 banks due to him being high risk because of his HECS debt. Ben shares that I had in my head a certain number that I'd be able to borrow and I didn't get it. My HECS was supposed to be the best loan I could ever get and something that I wouldn't notice. So it made me a bit upset to realise that was what was holding me back from achieving such a big life goal. SBS News divulges the results of a survey on HECS debt by Miss Hill, and it said that 59% of respondents reported student debt had impacted their ability to buy a home. It concludes that buying a first car, buying a home, starting a business, those sort of financial decisions that more often than not require borrowing for young people just won't be available because of the level of debt they have from their education. HECS debt majorly impacts the borrowing power of graduates, with home loans being a prime example. This is why HECS debt should be abolished. In conclusion, ladies, gentlemen, and Mr. Chairperson, HECS debt should be abolished because it reduces the borrowing power of graduates dramatically and deters further study. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Bonnie Young.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that the university HECS debt should be abolished. We, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. First, I shall begin by rebutting the weaknesses of the affirmative team's case. The second affirmative speaker argued that the abolition of the HECS debt could encourage further study among university graduates who don't have the burden of debt weighing them down. We believe that this is wrong. The desire for further study is driven by personal and professional goals, and debt has little effect on this. Now, if we wanted to get our population to be more educated, maybe, instead of giving $74 billion to people who have made it out of uni, it should go to regional schools, where they have less resources and a higher proportion of their cohort dropping. Our first speaker, Ashney, discussed the consequences of terminating HECS debt on the income rate and racial inequality in Australia, as well as those who have made voluntary repayments before its discontinuation. Tonight, I'll be discussing 2 points. In my first point, I address how abolishing current HECS debt will cause further inflation all over Australia. In my second, I tackle the issue of how university graduates may expect their HECS debt to be absorbed once more, discouraging them from repaying their debt. To my first point. At the moment, as of 2024, we are in a period of high inflation, with the cost of living rising rapidly. As a result of the outbreak of COVID-19 in 2020, Australia went into a recession. According to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the total inflation since then has been 18.4%. In comparison, from 2016 to 2019, the cost of living inflated by 6.6%. This means that inflation in the past 4 years is 3 times what it was in 2019. As stated by John Hawkins, an assistant professor of economics at the University of Canberra, the COVID-19 recession was the worst in Australia since the Great Depression, with the Reserve Bank of Australia estimating the economy was operating at 92% rather than at 100% as it is today. When an economy is not at full capacity, increased disposable income can boost production. However, when it is, as it is now, it only raises prices. The total stimulus package repayments for the COVID recession were $122 billion. Currently, there are $74 billion of HECS debt. This increase in disposable income will exacerbate inflationary pressures, making essential goods and services more expensive, particularly for those who are already disadvantaged. This ties in with our first speaker's points. We ought to focus on assisting those who really need our help, Australians of lower income backgrounds. Using these $74 billion to abolish all HECS debt not only misses the opportunity to help those truly struggling, but also directly harms them by causing prices to inflate significantly. In the closing of my first point, The university HECS debt should not be eliminated as it will escalate inflation, making life harder for all of us Australians to make ends meet. Now to my second point. Abolishing all HECS debt once sets a precedent. Students may believe it could occur again, even if there is only a small chance. If you were a student with a HECS loan, wouldn't you be less likely to pay it back, knowing your debt may be abolished? Of course, right? Why would you pay it if there was a chance you didn't have to? Now, why is this a problem? It keeps students in debt longer, and they may develop a habit of not paying off their debt as quickly as they can. This would be catastrophic for them in the future as, unlike HECS debt, most debt also come with compound interest that rises with time. In short, we should not terminate the university HECS debt because we believe that it will deter future uni students from paying their debt voluntarily and, in turn, cause them to develop unhealthy financial habits. In conclusion, we, the negative team, strongly advocate that the university HECS debt should not be abolished. Thank you.
Call upon the third affirmative speaker, Monique Beattie.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Monique Beattie and I am your third speaker for the affirmative team of this debate. For this debate, I will be summarising the points made in their speeches by the first and second speakers of my team. The topic of discussion for this evening is that the university HECS debt should be abolished, and we, the affirmative team, strongly agree with this statement for reasons explained. Before I summarise my teammates' speeches though, I will be rebutting points from the previous speakers' statements. The negative team has tried to tell you that abolishing HECS debt is unfair to students who have done voluntary payments. While this is true, the alternative is that millions of people struggle to make loans and money. Any action has consequences, and abolishing HECS debt has more pros than cons in the end. The negative team has tried to tell you that abolishing HECS debt will result in higher inflation. However, that is a broad statement that overlooks several factors. University education can also be funded by reallocation of resources. For example, in Germany, where tertiary education is free, the system is funded through a combination of efficient public financial management, strategic reallocation of resources, and targeted public spending. To quote from German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the system benefits from a well-managed fiscal framework that avoids the need for significant increases in taxes. Instead, it uses a balanced approach involving higher VAT and focused investment in education and other critical public services. The opposition has tried to tell you that HECS debt gives $24 million to graduates. This is untrue, however. As stated in the definition, HECS debt is a loan, and our second speaker stated, graduates don't get that money in their own pockets. The negative team has tried to tell you that students will make a habit of not paying their debt. If it's abolished, they won't have to pay back any debt. The opposition has tried to tell you that the abolishment of HECS debt disadvantages certain social groups and that the money should be instead used to benefit them. This is untrue, as the opposite is true. Abolishing HECS also disadvantages noble, low-paying jobs, as our first speaker has said. Now I will be summarising the points made by the first speaker of our team, Hayley.
HECS debts weigh a big financial burden on uni graduates. Transitioning from school to a job is already a stressful leap, but imagine having a debt chasing you for years in the future as well. This debt also keeps increasing over the years you have it, making it even harder to pay off. So if we abolish the HECS debt, this gives students less financial stress for their life after university. The HECS debt also puts certain groups of people at a disadvantage, which displays government hypocrisy. Jobs that are for the good of other people are advertised by the government, but these jobs are made even harder due to the HECS debt, and this includes out-of-work parents. Abolishing the HECS debt will relieve these people of the stress of a seemingly never-ending debt, and could help them with their careers instead of holding them back. Now I will be summarising the points made by the second speaker of our team, Samantha. The HECS debt discourages people from further studying. Many students have been worried about paying off their debt, and this has led to them discontinuing courses that would have led them to a very important job, such as doctors. Without the HECS debt, more students should be able to do longer courses without the stress of a debt chasing them up in the future. HECS debts also reduce the borrowing power of university graduates. Having a HECS debt classifies you as a high risk to banks and makes it a lot harder for students to get home loans. This prevents many students from owning a house, which is a big goal for the majority of them. If we don't abolish the HECS debt, this restricts many students' future financial decisions until they pay off their debts. In conclusion, we, the Affirmative team, strongly agree that university HECS debt should be abolished. We believe this because students still have the debt chasing them up in their futures after university, and it limits students' decisions educationally and financially. Thank you all for listening.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Ruben Cursor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the university HECS debt should be abolished. We, the negative team, believe that this is false. Before I summarise our team's case, I'd like to point out some flaws in the individual arguments, and then in the rebuttals, and then in the entire case of the Affirmative team. First, let's look at the arguments the Affirmative team made. The first Affirmative speaker claimed that even just CPI indexation, where the value of the loan is indexed to inflation, can drown students in debt, potentially preventing them from buying homes and starting families. Well, for one, let's assume that the rate at which the CPI increases, Consumer Price Index, exceeds the rate at which salaries grow. Yeah, that will make the loan harder to repay as time goes on. However, as of 2023, the government has indexed the value of the loan to whichever is lower between the CPI and the WPI, which is the wage price index. This also ties in to the point raised by our first speaker, which is that if you think a loan indexed to inflation is bad, what about people working minimum wage with bank loans, which always have a much higher interest than inflation except for periods of recession, and where payment is not contingent on income? They should be held first. It is true that abolishing the HECS debt may encourage graduates to begin families and buy homes. Many people experience financial stress, and it would be amazing if we could offer financial relief to everyone so that they could achieve these milestones. But we simply can't. It's not possible. As a result, those who need financial relief should get it first. Granted, some university graduates might be among this group. They should get relief. But abolishing all the HECS debt casts a very wide net. Sure, it offers financial relief to some who are really in need, but also to a lot who don't need it so desperately. We reaffirm, those in society who need financial relief the most should get it first. That's fair and that's equitable. Furthermore, there are much more efficient ways to make people more likely to start families. you can subsidise daycare, you can incentivise mothers to give birth, and you can expand parental leave. Abolishing the HECS debt might make some graduates more likely to start families, but it's analogous to watering a dehydrated plant by opening a window. Sure, so it might rain and the plant might get watered, but it'll be much more direct and much more effective to just use a watering can. The second affirmative speaker argued that by abolishing the HECS debt, younger people would have a higher likelihood of home ownership. It would help some young people who, by the way, as our first speaker established, are already at an advantage own homes. But, tying into the point raised by our second speaker about inflation, this will make it much tougher for the people who aren't as educated, who aren't as advantaged, and who don't earn as much money to own homes, which will perpetuate already existing racial and income inequality, as our first speaker spoke about. The second affirmative speaker also argued that graduates are more likely to pursue additional qualifications, creating a better workforce. There is simply no evidence to support this point. Career changes and the pursuit of additional qualifications are often driven by personal interests and job satisfaction, not just financial considerations. Furthermore, the second affirmative speaker mentioned that important degrees such as medicine often aren't followed through because of the high cost. Well, first of all, doctors get paid exorbitant amounts of money, so I don't think that's a great analogy. There are lower paying jobs that people might not see all the way through because of the HECS debt, but it'll be so much more efficient to simply subsidise these industries and increase the wages rather than abolishing all $74 billion of the HECS debt. Now we'll look at the affirmative team's attempts to rebut our points. The second affirmative speaker and the third affirmative speaker both claimed that the blanket abolition of the HECS debt doesn't equate to putting money in graduates' pockets. This was an attempt to rebut our first speaker's point about income inequality and our second speaker's point about inflation. It is the exact same thing economically speaking. The government is owed $74 billion by people who took out HECS loans, and abolishing the debt will give it to them, increasing their disposable income and therefore increasing their spending. The third affirmative speaker also mistook the total debt relief for $24 million when in reality it is $74 billion. Now that we've gone through the individual arguments and rebuttals of the affirmative team, let's look at why the entire case as a whole is logically fallacious. The affirmative team made 4 points, all of which were partially correct, but did not consider that there are just better ways to achieve these objectives. There are better ways to encourage home ownership, there are better ways to encourage the starting of families, there are better ways to encourage people to pursue additional degrees. You might think that relieving the HECS debt would address all of these issues at once more effectively, but you'd be wrong. A significant portion of the money will go to personal spending, not addressing any of these three social issues. This waste would not occur if the government split up the money and addressed each issue directly. Now, I'm going to sum up my team's case. Our first speaker showed how abolishing the HECS debt would worsen income and racial inequality rather than help the structurally disadvantaged who need financial relief. She also highlighted the unfairness of those who made voluntary repayments. Our second speaker discussed how abolishing the HECS debt would worsen inflation, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. Tying into the first speaker's point on equality, it is not just a missed opportunity to help the poor if we abolish the HECS debt, it would make life much tougher for them. She also explained how a one-time abolition of all existing HECS debt sets a harmful precedent. If students think there's even a moderate to small chance their debt might be abolished, many won't make voluntary repayments. This will affect the sustainability of the HECS system and will keep students in debt for longer. Our team has shown that abolishing existing HECS debt would be unfair, deepen racial inequality, deepen income inequality, worsen inflation, and undermine the system's sustainability. It's neither fair nor is it necessary. Thank you.
grab a Speaker of the Night certificate for me?
Just from the front.
Yeah.
I now invite, I think, one of the adjudicators to come up.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Perfect. No feedback today, semi-finals, and no, you won't be able to see our scores today. What I can say though is well done on getting this far. By a unanimous decision, we have awarded tonight's debate to the affirmative team. Our speaker of the night today goes to our second affirmative, Samantha.
Yeah, I thought I'm just gonna message Fran now. I said to Fran, I'll tell her straight away. Oh,
I call upon a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
I'd like to thank the opposing team, chairman and timekeeper, everyone who showed up tonight, and the adjudicators. Thanks for a great debate.
I call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
First of all, we'd like to thank the audience, all those who come out to support us. Looking out and seeing a friendly face is like, gives a lot of strength in the middle of your speech. I'd like to thank the adjudicators for coming in, listening to us. And I'd like to thank the opposition. That was a really good debate. Yeah, as you see, we were kind of fumbling for a vote. You guys had really good points. So thank you so much for such an awesome debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.